come before you
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Forgiveness is a complicated endeavor. Forgiveness can be challenging. Forgiveness is a complex thing. Now, in the law, forgiveness often has more to do with justice, restoration. It is very deliberate, and it guides all of your outward actions. If this happens, then this should be what restores the relationship. It even goes into a great detail in some accounts. Some of my favorites include livestock. Maybe it's because I grew up in Wisconsin. But they'll say if Joe lends Bob his ox, and while Bob has the ox, it injures somebody, the restoration is due from Bob, not from Joe who owns the ox. And it will even get more detailed than that. This is why some people don't like some of those books in the Old Testament that I find utterly fascinating. Now, that's to say, it can guide all of the outward external actions. It could even perhaps force someone to say, I'm sorry, or acknowledge their wrongdoing. But it does not guide the heart. Forgiveness is a complicated endeavor. Jesus tips the scales towards the internal, particularly in the gospel lesson this morning. He doesn't shy away from it. He recognizes that forgiveness is complex and difficult, and he gives us some guidelines with the hope and expectation that we will restore the relationship not just externally and make what is due restorative in terms of justice, but he wants our inner peace as well, because as complex as forgiveness can be, we need it. Forgiveness is so important. Forgiveness is what leads us towards peace. Forgiveness leads us towards God's love. Forgiveness, at the same time, is such a challenge sometimes. I'm sure that's just me. Maybe y'all don't experience that quite the same way. But I do think we have some profound guidance from Jesus. Jesus, I don't know if he's trying to lighten the mood as we talk about forgiveness, but I think there's a little joke in the very beginning of this gospel lesson that's easy to miss. It says, Jesus said, if another member of the church sins against you. Did you catch it? If. It's a joke. You see? My wife is always telling me church jokes aren't funny. Come on. It should say when a member of the church sins against you, not if. Let's get real. It's always going to happen. Any of you not been sinned against? Waiting. Nope. Okay. See, it's a little joke. Jesus is telling a joke. Poor Jesus, didn't get laughed at this time. Jesus says, if another member of the church, now actually if we go back to the Greek and if we go to some of the other translations, it would say brother. Now brother, we say, well, that's exclusionary because it doesn't include the sister, but the importance here is that it's kinship. These are people we care about. These are people we're close to. And our community of faith is a family of sorts. We're close to one another because we rely on one another to experience the fullness of the gifts we've been entrusted with. So Jesus says, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. This is also very simple, basic management instruction. It's good business practice. My father taught me early, you criticize in private and you praise in public. And then he reiterated that to me hundreds of times as I worked for him, not because I was necessarily breaking the rule, but because it's that important. Now, not only does it make good economic sense to follow this principle, it makes good emotional sense as well. Now, there's some subtlety here that I think needs to be drawn out. He says, if a member sins against you, you need to go when the two of you are alone and point it out. Now, some of us are conflict averse. Some of us just think, well, it's really not that big of a deal, but yet we let it trouble our heart, right? And it continues to plague us. So we either need to let it go as really not that big of a deal, or go and speak to them. Because some of the time, when we go and speak to our neighbor and tell them how we've been hurt, how we feel wronged, how we've been sinned against, they may be surprised. They may not even realize the hurt they have caused you. It affords an opportunity for a conversation that will restore you. And here we see Jesus saying, if it works out, you've regained your brother, you've regained that member. The hope, the expectation of this process is restoration, wholeness, peace, and understanding between the two of you. It's the pursuit of forgiveness can be challenging. Forgiveness, don't get me wrong, forgiveness is complex. But the first step is going and talking to the person who's sinned against you. Jesus knows that this won't always work. So he goes on. If the member won't listen to you, then you go and you find a friend to go with you. Now, again, I think there's more to this than what's actually in the passage, because frankly, when you go to tell a friend about a problem you've had with another friend, when you go to tell them about the problem, the first thing you might experience is some sympathy, some empathy for the situation or the wrong that you are experiencing. Oh man, that's terrible. That's really too bad. But when you ask them to go with you to that friend, their tenor might change. They may say, well, have you thought that maybe they were having a bad day? Or have you considered this perspective that they might be holding? See, part of the process isn't outlined in the gospel, but it's still there, right? Because when we go to the friend will probably sympathize with us. They'll probably feel, express some empathy, but they have to be sure it's wrong and feel like justice needs to be done before they'll go with you to the friend to address the problem. Am I right? And even then, sometimes, the person who's sinned won't acknowledge it. There are things where it needs to be brought to the church to be prayed over and considered together. Here again, unless you're sure of things, you're not going to take the step with somebody. And if that's the case, it needs to be let go of. It needs to be released. Forgiveness needs to extend. There are times where the sin won't be acknowledged. Not to you, not in the company of a friend, not in the presence of the church. And then Jesus says, let that person be like a Gentile and a tax collector. Now, this probably needs to be updated for our understanding, all right? We need to carry this forward because I don't have Gentile next to anybody in my contacts list. I have at least one tax collector, but I don't think it's what Jesus meant. He's wanting you to treat them as an outsider. Because there's times, perhaps because of abuse or some very serious sin, when it is not acknowledged, you need to protect yourself through separation. And you need the support of your friends and of the church at that time. So it's important that you've gone to them with the problem first. That not only have they empathized with you, not only have they supported you, not only have they confronted this sin with you, now they're able to support you in these most extreme of circumstances where the person needs to be made an outsider to you. Because there are times where we need separation before we can offer forgiveness, because the end result, Jesus still wants us to find forgiveness, because whatever we hang on to, whatever we cling to, will be held on to in heaven. Some of us have been carrying a burden, a sin that has not been addressed. And Jesus sets forth a path towards peace and restoration for us. Contemporary preacher and theologian Rob Bell wrote, "To forgive is to set someone free and then find out that it's you." To forgive is to set someone free and then find out that it's you. If you are waiting for someone to do something so you'll forgive them, you're allowing them to control your joy. I hope that we take this gospel lesson very seriously, that we set about doing the work that Jesus outlines for us as we are sinned against, and that we have open ears when folks come to us when we have sinned, that we might be restored, that we might be made whole, that we might find the peace of Christ, and that we might find forgiveness, complex as it is, a thing to embrace. Amen.